One is we're dedicating the show to all of our good friend Nick Charles at the top, and what better way to dedicate a show but to be our 10th anniversary, which of course he was a big part of for over 9 years. But I'm happy to have the opportunity to have everyone reacquaint themselves with the series and what it's accomplished. So I think in that way, I'm very happy about it. It was created to match young fighters tough, develop them by having them on multiple times and, hopefully turning them from, prospect to contender. I mean, the series has given young fighters exposure that might not have had, the public the opportunity to see, hopefully, young stars of the future. We had a mission and purpose and definition, and that still holds true. It's not like any other boxing series, and we've been successful. And I'm sure you've gotten the statistics, but they speak for themselves. The significance. We've only had a little over 150 shows, so the fact that we've had 43 fighters that fought on ShoBox and then went on to world titles, means that in less than every 4 broadcasts you're going to see a future champion. And I think the names of the people that have been on, from Andre Ward to Timothy Bradley to Carl Froch to Robert Guerrero. I mean, you have the list. And all of them in sort of the infancy of their careers. And in some cases, whether it's Andre Ward that fought 5 times or Timothy Bradley that fought 3 times, and then we were fortunate enough to see him go on that 4th time and win a world title against Junior Witter. That's a sense of accomplishment, because it was because of those 3 times on ShoBox that put him in position to be able to get in the title fight. And the fact that he won, that's just, icing on the cake. Well, we've had, of course, we've had world title fights with Timothy Bradley, a true ShoBoxer, or Kendall Holt knocking out in spectacular Ricardo Torres. But if we've had fights that might not traditionally be to the true definition of ShoBox, the new generation, it's because we had an opportunity to get those fights for ShoBox dollars. So we were able to give our fans, sort of an added bonus. So that's the reasoning behind, giving, our viewers on ShoBox a little, added value. You know what? I never really thought about that. I just thought about trying to stay true to the definition, and I felt that this was a unique show, and it had a purpose and a definition that was different than any other boxing series. And if we could continue and stay true to our mission, it would, hopefully develop into something. I don't know that I really thought what would it be like, 10 years from then. Of course, we have, Friday night, our 10th anniversary show with Diego Magdaleno and Alejandro Perez. Good, matchup for us, because Magdaleno fits the mold of ShoBox, has a strong amateur career, has an aggressive style, exciting fighter. And taking on, which I think is going to be his toughest test to date in Alejandro Perez, even though he lost to Rico Ramos. He put up a good test for Ramos at the time. And, of course, Ramos just won a title this past weekend. And, that's what we have, right now. We're looking at possibly doing an August 6th show in Youngstown, Ohio. But we're working on, that card right now. I'm looking at putting a really good ShoBox fight as the opener with Francisco Contreras taking on Danny Williams. Contreras is, of course, talented, 16-0. Williams is 17-1. And then on the main event, looking to match Kelly Pavlik versus Daryl Cunningham. It's difficult to, obviously, we want young fighters. We look, I look for, I talk with a lot of matchmakers. I talk with promoters. I'm pitched fighters all the time. And because generally young fighters, you can't really look at their pro career that carefully once they come to ShoBox, because we're asking for them to take a step up. So I generally look at their amateur credentials. Saturday night's a perfect example. Magdaleno had 130, amateur fights. He's obviously a talented fight. He makes for, good fights. The same could be said of Casey Ramos, 110 amateur fights. I have pitched, since we don't do a lot of shows, we get a lot of proposals. And Casey Ramos was actually going to fight a main events fighter, Jose Cito Collado. And Collado fell out. But I had a proposal for a card for main events, and I put it in my proposal file. And, I called Kathy Duva. I said, we can't give you a show. We don't have anywhere to put it. But, your fighter, is a super featherweight, and if he wants to come on and fight Casey Ramos, I've got a young kid that's 13-0. It was a case where she said yes. Unfortunately, he fell out. But, I'll look at, every Monday I look at all the fights that would have happened that weekend. When I go to a fight, whether it be ShoBox or championship, I'll get the undercard, I'll get the bout sheet, and I'll try to look at the undercard to see if there are any, young fighters on the card that, may be interesting, or I'll ask whoever the promoter is of that series, who's out there, is there anybody I, should be looking at? Styles are interesting. I don't I remember years ago we had a fight with an upcoming prospect, and he fought Ian Ugly Gardner. I called him Ian Ugly Gardner, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any fighter, but I knew that he didn't make great fights. But still, for that fighter coming up, it was a challenging style. But I look at styles, and I know that some fighters make, can be not as appealing to others, but sometimes that style may be good for the prospect in this case. And I don't care who wins, but when Robert Guerrero lost on ShoBox to Gamaliel Diaz was a little awkward. He was a moving fighter. A lot of young fighters are used to having a fighter right in front of them, and they're brought along, so the fighter's right there. They have to branch out and try to fight different styles of fighters if they are going to go on and succeed and become world champions, because not everybody's going to fight the same. Before any matchup is approved, I will, research them on Google, on YouTube. I will get videotape from Bela in New York, and or see if we already have some sort of archive. I can get hopefully a sense of most fighters on YouTube. I research their box recs and their fight faxes, so I will always have a good idea before a decision is made on what the matchup's going to be. It's not a case where the matchups are just given to us. Oh, you have to go. Oh, absolutely, you have to go much more than what's on paper, because paper can be deceiving. Well, we like to think that we've discovered a lot of boxers. There's a lot of fighters that had never even been seen on television, though Curtis Cintron isn't coming off of his best performance, I remember, him coming on. It never been seen on television, nervous as could be, awkward, looking like he had to grow into his body. And, he came out and knocked out Said Wali in his first fight on ShoBox. Of course, Said Wali turned out to be a pretty good fighter. We've had, a lot of nice stories. The Kendall Holt story. I mean, Kendall beating a lot of good, fighters and going on to win his title on ShoBox. Not a lot of people were that familiar with Kendall. We had Paulie Malignaggi on and very early in his career, who turned out to be a good fighter. And they're always the champions. I mean, Andre Ward fought 5 times on ShoBox. And though he was a gold medalist, the gold medalists weren't, as publicized as they had been, say, 10 years earlier. And, we truly developed him, and he had his career-defining fight against Edison Miranda on ShoBox. And, then went on to become a champion. We had Nonito Donaire, is another example. I don't know how familiar people would have been with Nonito Donaire at the time he was on ShoBox. Or even Robert Guerrero, So I think, who knows what will happen. If I look at some of the young prospects to watch now that we've had on ShoBox, from Sean Porter, Edwin Rodriguez, Luis Franco, this Cuban kid with 400 amateur fights. He's 9-0, and he's fighting guys in the top 25. I just saw a kid in New York we had on ShoBox, Orlando Del Valle, Valle, and he speaks beautiful English. He's 13-0, makes for exciting fights. Of course, we had on, Mike Jones, who's another talented fighter who's moved on from ShoBox, and hopefully we'll see that with the Chris Avalos who lost on ShoBox, but I hope the loss on ShoBox, he came back to have an impressive performance, but I hope that loss on ShoBox was like Robert Guerrero's loss on ShoBox and propels him to work harder and to realize he may not be perfect and he still has some work to do, so they can always improve, but they're getting exposure at a younger age than they normally would. They're going back to their hometowns and feeling like they may be a little bit of a celebrity because they're 10-0 and been on television, which never would have happened, and how they handle that and continue to grow as a fighter because they're far from perfect at that point. So we've done 157 telecasts. So, we've had, of course, 43 champions. We've had 89 fighters who suffered their first loss, of their pro careers. But we've also had 6 fighters who won a world title after losing on ShoBox. So I've always said, when you're young like this and you match a 10-0 kid against a 12-0 kid, if one of them loses, it's not the end of the world. They're only in the infancy of their career. And they can use that loss as a motivator, as opposed to a deterrent, and still go on to succeed, in boxing and become a champion. I would say that it is because it's the real only one. I mean, we focus on developing young talent. And I believe as long as there's boxing, there should be a ShoBox. We've had, that's funny because there's fights that stick out in your mind for various reasons. You could go to the, the double knockdown, with Saku Powell and Cornelius Bunrage, but that was interesting because of the double knockdown. Because of the fact that I'm very passionate about what we do and I believe in what we do, my memorable moments are the fighters that have been on ShoBox and who've developed on ShoBox, and then we've seen for one reason or another that they had significant fights that would go on to make them champions. And I know I referenced the Robert Guerrero, because of the fight, it was a young fighter tested by a seasoned fighter, who had experience and also experience going in the later rounds, which Robert didn't. He lost that fight in a split decision, but he learned from that defeat and went on to avenge his loss on ShoBox and later won a world title. I mean, Timothy Bradley, I find a lot of self-satisfaction and also satisfaction for everybody that works on this series to know that we developed them to put them in the position to fight for a title. We actually were able to cover the title, and they won. There's a lot of good fights that we've had, but I like to think, my other memory, which you may have seen and that I had sent out, there's another fight that I think of starting back in the beginning when Juan Urango was 13-0 and he fought Mike Arnautas, who was 10-0-1, and it was like an all-out war for 8 rounds. It was a draw, and it was an opener for Sam Peter was on the main event, actually. And, it was a classic example of 2 undefeated fighters. Somebody ended up, it turned up in a draw. Urango went on to be a good fighter, won for a title, and Arnautas challenged for the title a couple times, I believe, and turned out to be a pretty good fighter. There was this one fight, I don't know if you ever saw it, but it's Ebo Elder versus Courtney Burton, and he was, Burton was winning the fight, and Ebo, who had fought on ShoBox, I think that was his second shot on ShoBox, and he ended up pulling it out in the last round with a KO, and it was just. And his face was bloodied, and it was just, it was a great fight, great comeback, and Ebo was a good overachiever. I'm looking for a couple things. Number one is I'm looking storyline in order to let our audience know about these young fighters. Number two is I'm looking for the fighters on both sides, preferably to have step-up fights, or if there's a case where one fighter might, on paper, seem to be the more talented fighter, then, make sure that young talented fighter is having, his toughest test to date. I'm not looking for knockouts. I'm looking to have step-up fights for the fighters. I'm not looking for KOs necessarily. I don't look to have matchups and to have KOs. Certainly KOs are going to come, and they come often, but, if we have a good, well-matched chess match, for 8 rounds, that's fine with me. The top of the show, which I said we're dedicating to our friend Nick Charles. And then at the top of the show, we're going to have a sort of definition piece on the 10 years of ShoBox and what it's been, what it is. And then we are going to have some 3 fighters from Kendall Holt to Andre Ward to Kermit Cintron talk about their experiences on ShoBox, what it meant to them. Then we also will sprinkle throughout the show some facts and figures, on ShoBox. So trying to spread the celebration throughout the show. Well, it'll be fun in that aspect, and then I just, hope, I think we've done a good job. Certainly we had a late replacement for Casey Ramos. Diego Magdaleno and Alejandro Perez, has the makings of being a good fight. And I think Casey Ramos, against Kevlishvili, which I'm going into fighter meetings shortly. Hopefully I will find out the correct pronunciation. But I did, even though he's a replacement, I did get video on him. I have seen him fight. I know he's a straight-up accurate puncher, has limited power. He'll need to outwork Ramos, but he did have over 100 amateur fights. He was a Eastern European champion. I saw his fight against Ronnie Rios, who's a Golden Boy up-and-comer, of which he lost an 8-round unanimous decision. But he's a slow starter, but he does come to fight. He's disciplined. And for a late replacement, I think he'll give a competitive fight to Ramos, because Ramos is not a big puncher either. Though Ramos did have 110 amateur fights, he's a talented guy. He's gone 8 rounds 4 times. I just hope that it isn't a case where Ramos can be the faster guy against Georgie and outbox him for 8 rounds. But I hope we get good fights, because that's what I care about.